Welcome to Block 25 of our Celebrating the States Block of the Month. This is our version of the Arkansas block, sometimes called the Arkansas Crossroads block. For this block, you will need 5 fabrics, 2 blues, 2 reds, and 1 light. I chose a dark blue and a medium blue, a dark red and a medium red. From each of the reds, cut 1 strip that's 2 inches wide by at least 18 inches long. From each of the reds, you will also need to cut 8 squares that measure 2 inches by 2 inches. From each of the blue fabrics, you need to cut 1 strip that is 2 inches wide by at least 18 inches long. From the light fabric, cut 8 squares that measure 3.5 inches by 3.5 inches. Unless directed otherwise, piece using 1/4 inch seam allowances. First, we're going to make the 4-patch units using the strips. We need to make 2 strip sets that are a blue strip sewn to a red strip. In order to get some nice contrast in the block, I pieced the lightest red to the darkest blue and the darkest red to the lightest blue. Press towards the blue strips. Next, we need to cut 2-inch wide sections from the strip set. I like to cut both strip sets at the same time. Square up one edge and then use a bigger ruler. Start at the 12-inch marking and then cut at the 10-inch, 8-inch, 6-inch, 4-inch, and 2-inch markings. Moving the ruler more and the fabric less equals straighter cuts. You need 8 sections to make 4 4-patch units from each of the blue-red combinations. I used 21-inch strips, so I was able to get 10 sections per strip set when I cut. I ended up having an extra 4-patch of each of the blue-red combos. I will get them made and ironed and then set them aside for another project. The center seams should nest, have the forward-facing seam on top for better control of which way the seams go. Press the seam to one side or open if you prefer. These 4-patch squares should measure 3.5 inches by 3.5 inches. Next, we need to make the light squares with red corner units. For this part, I like to use my diagonal seam tape to help me sew the corner-to-corner lines. There are a variety of other products that will also help you with this technique. The diagonal seam tape happens to be my favorite. I use the 1/4-inch markings on my seam guide plate to help me get the diagonal seam tape in position. Now that I have it in its place, instead of having to draw a line corner to corner on the fabric, I just start one corner under the needle and have the other corner follow the red line to sew corner to corner, much faster than drawing lines. On opposite corners of the light 3.5-inch squares, you need to have right sides together, place a red square, and sew corner to corner, raw edge to raw edge. Make sure the reds on opposite corners are the same red. You will do both sets of the light and red corner units, 4 of each from dark red and the medium red. Once they're all sewn, you can trim the seams to a 1/4-inch seam allowance and press. Or, if you like saving extra half-square triangle units, sew another seam a 1/2 inch away from the first seam, cut in between the sewn lines, and then press. Using this technique, you'll end up with units you need plus 16 half-square triangle units to use in another project. I don't like throwing away fabric, so I almost always use this technique to get those extra half-square triangle units. Press the seams open on the 3.5-inch light square red corner units. For the small half-square triangle units, I pressed all mine towards the red fabric. Now we need to put all the units together to make 4 corners for the block. 2 of each of the red-blue color combinations. Combine 4 matching 4-patch squares with the background squares that have the same red in the corners. Both halves of the corner blocks are the same, so you're really only sewing one unit. Piece the corner units to the 4-patch units. A visual cue to look for when you're sewing is the reds should always be sewn to reds. If you're sewing red to blue or white, it's not right. Press towards the light fabric. You sew these sections together, the blue fabric should form a diagonal line and the light fabric should form a diagonal line going the other way. It should kind of look like an X. Piece the half sections together to make a corner. The center seam should nest, but I did pin it to make sure things lined up correctly. Make all 4 corners of the block. They will measure 6.5 inches square once they're pressed. Press the seams in one direction or open if you prefer. Sew the corners together to make 2 half blocks. I did use some pins to help prevent seams from shifting as I sewed the block together. Press both halves the same way. Pin as necessary to sew the last seam. This block would be a great one to use for a scrappy quilt. Make multiple blocks in a variety of colors using scraps, and when you sew them together, you'll get an awesome secondary design. Press this final seam to one side. The block should measure 12.5 inches by 12.5 inches. We hope you will hit the like button, leave us a comment about the block, share with your quilting friends, and subscribe. Thanks for watching and happy quilting!